It's hard to understate the impact that Diablo had on action RPGs when it was released in 1997 and followed up with its incredible sequel in 2000. With a very satisfying gameplay loop, alongside intuitive controls and fantastic presentation, it was practically inevitable other developers would try to emulate its success, especially considering the relatively low cost to make one. There are innumerable so-called Diablo clones, and while its most failed to capture a share of the market, some did achieve modest success, like Dungeon Siege and Torchlight. That still leaves dozens more almost lost to time, such as the South Korean developed The Fate, a very much by-the-books Diablo affair with few standout features or mechanics, besides it being the most obscure game I've ever covered, making it somewhat of an enigma. Notice I didn't give a specific date of release, because the few download sites listed as coming out in 2003, although there could be the international release, with the original date being 2002 in South Korea, per the defunct game's website. South Korea has been a large market for Blizzard's games like Diablo and StarCraft, and other MMOs and ARPGs for decades now, so I'd figured they would have produced similar video games. Created by Tromwell Software and published domestically by Wizardsoft, and then internationally by 4AM Entertainment, from the few archived press releases, it was supposedly a modest success in Korea, selling over 100,000 copies. After these initial plans and figures, the game seemingly disappears afterwards. All the associated companies didn't really work on anything else. The only posts of information I've managed to scrounge together come from abandonware sites and Russian bloggers, of course, who may very well be the only people that ever played the game, considering that there's only a couple YouTube videos available currently. That seems very odd for a game that sold thousands of units supposedly. A big thanks has to be given to the channel First Place HD, who has uploaded footage of the game and continually archives a plethora of obscure PC games. Great work, my dude. Apparently, one of the devs commented on their video and I was able to ask them a couple of questions about The Fate. Their opinion was that PC gaming had started to shift to online distribution and The Fate fell by the wayside. This is odd considering it was the early 2000s when it came out, but then again, it's hard to know how The Fate and other PC games at the time in South Korea were distributed. In any case, I found getting The Fate to work on Windows 10 fairly easy actually, only crashing like once in the entire 20+ hour game time. The difficulty was getting access to the music files, which seemed to be missing in a lot of the existing download links. In the ones that worked for me and had the patches and music files present, you have to run a Fate updater program, and while it certainly worked for me, I can't guarantee the safety of such a program. However, to play and finish the game isn't so easy with the absence of a proper English manual or walkthrough, which almost led me to giving up. Fortunately, some archival scans of a Korean gaming magazine had been uploaded which document each point of the game in great detail. With a simple image translator, you can easily decipher the more complex sections and comfortably beat the game. It was seriously luck of the draw to find them, so I've uploaded all the pages, available via a link in the description. Now, what is The Fate all about? From the weak English translation, the main gist is that millennia ago, the great warrior Euclid sealed away the demon Dukatsi on the island of Latranda using his blade. Such an invaluable artifact attracts the twins Lonnie and Ranon, who venture to the island only for the brothers to be overwhelmed by monsters, leading to Ranon's apparent death and Lonnie left mourning him. After some nondescript time, Lonnie returns to the island in search of concluding the fate of his brother, but the recent surge of monsters and a black-cloaked figure, resembling Lonnie himself, leads them getting involved in dealing with ancient prophecies, demons, and the inhabitants of Latranda itself. You're soon teaming up with the sorceress Rena and the battle-hardened knight Blunt to clear out caves, dungeons, and temples filled with demons and monsters, finding artifacts that will progress the game. From my playthrough, it's an entirely linear series of quests. You don't make any serious choices, and there's very few side quests. The most that the game deviates is exploring more of the world, fighting enemies, or interacting with the denizens of the three main towns in the game. Despite the iffy translation, it's pretty straightforward stuff, especially with the walkthrough in tow. You can figure out where to go without needing to talk to everyone. There is a large number of NPCs and a surprising amount of lore on the world and historical figures, but the lack of interactions between you and your party and any real decision making by the player leads it towards being pretty forgettable. However, I did find a couple of parts in the late game interesting regarding Lonnie's destiny and fate and how it tied into Latranda's past. In any case, it's not particularly special. If you've already played Diablo or similar loot-heavy RPGs, then the Fate takes little mental adjustment to figure out. Even without a manual, there's a hotkey list as well as descriptions for most options and items. You have a party of 3 characters, which can be switched between at any time, each with their own equipment sets and can be controlled by the AI to attack enemies and follow whoever you're playing as. Attacking is a simple affair of clicking, as is picking up items and organizing your inventory. Excess items can be easily sold off or stored in your luggage, which is good when there's a large amount of loot on offer. From potions to rings to magic scrolls and weapons and armor, if you enjoy endless loot, then the Fate has you covered. In the latter half of the game, you can find a blacksmith that can upgrade your gear. Unfortunately, I didn't really figure out the proper combination method, and since weapons don't degrade and you're constantly finding new stuff, I couldn't be bothered. The actual depth of the gameplay comes in the form of managing your party status, like making sure their health and mana are stable, having enough supplies, and knowing when to bail out of a fight. Remembering the hotkeys for each party member so they don't get overwhelmed is essential for survival. I wouldn't call the game hard outside the boss fights which are unable to leave. You can save whenever and can easily teleport back to town to restock and revive fallen teammates by just pressing the enter key. I quite like how you don't buy potions, you instead collect jars which can be filled with either health or mana, although it lacks proper depth beyond this. There's no real character abilities per se, you instead change their stats a bit between levels, like how many hit points, DPS, or chance to hit. This makes Rena the most interesting character to play, with a focus on magical attacks, with Lonnie and Blunt playing melee roles. How Rena makes spells is really cool. You have to place down the type of spell, then the form it will take, alongside what element. This opens up a lot of customization and options from homing missiles, AoE attacks, stunning enemies, and area denial. It also looks really cool in practice, and the devastation by the late game is very satisfying. But it's all offense, there's no support roles or skills to buff allies. I was sorta hoping Lonnie would fill this role like a paladin of sorts, with Blunt playing the typical barbarian tank, but no, they both function the same with only a difference in equipment and animations. The game tries to rectify this by having Sharons, which can be used by Lonnie and Blunt to cast magical attacks, except it has to be done manually so don't count on the AI utilizing them, and I could only find like one in the game. Maybe I missed some optional dungeons or loot drops, I just don't know. I didn't really like exploring the dungeons that much anyhow. They get very maze-like in the second half of the game, with literally hundreds of mobs you have to cleave through, frequently leading to a dead end on account of how linear the stages are. What I ended up doing was abusing Reina's overpowered lightning attacks, or racing through the area before pausing to revive my teammates and save the game. It just gets too fatiguing. So what makes the Fate stand out compared to its contemporaries is its really solid atmosphere and presentation, which is as close to the OG Diablo games as is possible for any clone. The music has that rustic, acoustic style alongside some vocals and great ambience that makes each section of the game stand out more than it otherwise would. For the early 2000s, the graphics were clearly years behind with a heavy focus on isometric artwork and 2D models, except I'd argue it holds up better than most 3D RPGs of the time, at least the ones without a substantial budget. There's a very baroque, pastoral look to the world that I've always found appealing. The amount of destruction you can leave in your party's wake is impressive, thanks to plenty of gore, a large variety of enemies, and loot that scales up that makes backtracking not too bad, especially when enemies don't incessantly respawn. Because of this and the game mechanics, you can easily play the Fate as an expansion or a total conversion of Diablo with little mental adjustment. Alongside the absence of game-breaking issues and the uniqueness of it being a competently made South Korean game, I can recommend it to those looking for scratching that Diablo itch that flares up occasionally. I do enjoy talking about abandonware games that have some soul and effort put into them, so while it's not a classic, I'm hoping the Fate gets the proper archival treatment instead of it becoming vaporware.